Should be up and running now. Hopefully. Yeah, music's up, stream's up, stream information's updated. Good to go. Another day, another hour trying to make sense of these drawings before they vanish in front of my eyes. What should we talk about today? Let's see. Oh, I wanted to mention, because this came up earlier, a lot of people these days seem to be very fond of relying on quotes from other people. Maybe it's because of the fact that social media keeps pushing the same type of content, but at least for me, when I'm looking at my algorithm, or what the algorithm shows me, are just people who kind of repeat the same message, just with a slightly different interpretation. I very much understand now why people call it an echo chamber, because I can just see how the message gets echoed. I think that people hear something, think, oh, it sounds amazing, I need to share it because it affects my life, since it speaks to it so directly. But they stop at the surface level and don't understand the implications of the exact wording that they are repeating. Here's an example of something I keep hearing. People say, chase your dreams, right? Go out there and chase your dreams. On the surface level, that sounds fine, because if your dream is important, you should chase it, right? But the problem with that is that it implies the dream is outside of you, and it implies that you have to run after it. Now, I understand the sentiment. It's saying that you need to take action in order for you to bring things to life. But what people probably don't realize is that the words you utilize in describing things actually has a big impact on how you view it. Words shape reality. Well, they don't just shape reality, they define it. Reality is inherently meaningless, like it exists as a neutral and objective force. If you go out of your way to say certain things, what you say becomes what exists. And then by saying that you are chasing your dream, you're labeling your dream as something that is both external and something that requires pursuit. But that's an inaccurate definition of it. Dreams all are born from within you. So it's not a matter of chasing your dream. It's a matter of bringing your dream to reality because it's inside of you. The objective is to align the circumstances so that what exists inside you already, your dream, now exists outside of you in reality. And that is what is lost when you say you need to chase your dream. Chasing something means that it's running away from you and then moving away from you. But a dream is always within you. If it isn't, then it wouldn't be a dream. While a dream can fade, chasing it makes it fade faster, right? That's why when you have a nice dream and you try to recreate it or go back into it, you end up forgetting about it faster than if you had just sat and basically recalled it because it already exists. But the moment that you treat it as if it is something else, something that you need to pursue, it runs. In other words, what is important to do in life is to clearly define what you are doing and how you speak about phenomena that occur. It's actually very, I wouldn't call it sinister completely, but insidious? I forget how you pronounce that word. But it's super subtle. The advent of social media has created a open forum where everyone can speak. The problem with this is that, not to sound elitist, but there are many people who do not understand the importance of particular phrasing when it comes to speaking. It's not so much uneducated people as just people who have never understood how much impact a particular phrasing of a word can result, or the impact that can result from a particular phrasing of something. These people will hear what appears to be very deep and something that may very well be deep, but then they will espouse it without any further considerations on the deeper implications. Like the classic saying about grinding and working harder, right? If you want to have what you want in life, you need to grind for it. But that doesn't really apply when you put it on yourself. Grinding away at something is correct, because an arduous task is equivalent to sharpening a blade. Persistence and effort are what will lead you to obtaining the outcome you desire there. But when you say that you need to grind in your life, that you need to grind yourself, that's missing the point. Or instead of missing the point, people don't think through the implications. It is not only an imperfect analogy, it is an incorrect analogy. When you say that you are grinding in life, the act of grinding is the act of removal. You are chipping away at things bit by bit until what remains is sharpened. You are losing a little bit with every session. That is, in my opinion, what leads to burnout as well. People say they grind and grind and grind, but because there is no deeper meaning or purpose behind it, they are just grinding themselves away. There is nothing left but the grind, and they are grinding themselves into dust. Instead of grinding, just say you are working or doing things. It sounds correct when you say you're grinding, because it seems like you're chipping away at an impossible objective. But that particular framing of the situation will end up more harmful than actually beneficial. It will rally up motivation at the beginning because saying you're grinding makes it seem like you're making steady progress. But you see, it's also contradictory because success is not something that is whittled away at, it's something built. When you say you're grinding to build your dream life, that's just literally a contradiction. You cannot grind something to build something. They are opposite actions. They are opposing directions. Just say that you are building because that is what you're doing. If you say that you are grinding, you are undoubtedly going to grind and slowly lose what is important. That is something that people appear to forget until they are already at the point where there is next to nothing left except for the sharpened life that they have created. Not even created, but left behind. Because when you grind something, you don't create anything. What you do is you just sharpen what already exists. The analogy is apt. It does fit in certain circumstances. Like if you are an athlete, you definitely want to grind because you want to remove the imperfections in your abilities. But extending the analogy towards life in general is a fatal flaw because of the fact that it implies you don't have enough, or it implies that you're dull, that you are something that needs to be grinded. That's just the wrong viewpoint. You already have the material. Why are you getting rid of more? You want to be building instead of grinding. That's my thoughts on it. Too many people are being careless with the words that are being utilized in their day-to-day lives. Take, for example, calling people king, right? I understand the sentiment there. It's very supportive, and then it treats everyone as a ruler, a king, someone of worth and incredible value. But the problem with that is that when you call someone else king, you are acknowledging their reign. You are reducing your agency. It might not be the intention that you started with, but the scary thing about your mind is that it is an accumulation of information. The more you say things, the more it builds up, basically a gauge where that becomes correct. Your brain and your mind, well, I suppose it's more your mind, not necessarily your brain, but you are always accumulating things. You're always accumulating data points and information. Then your default settings will be based upon the information that you have accumulated. It's kind of like a morality gauge in a game. Your alignment is based on everything you do and say. it does have a large impact on your life. It's just that people are too careless about it. Video games are actually a very useful model for you to govern your life by. Stats do exist in reality. It's just that there is no clear articulation for them. There's no handy-dandy system that can show you where you currently stand. But you have to be aware that the stats are always building, and every act that is being performed builds upon either a stat or a objective, or no, either a stat or a skill. If you're not careful, you'll end up building the wrong thing, and there is no easy method to respec in life. Going back to harmful phrasings, another thing that I keep hearing people talk about, what was it? I had it in my mind a bit earlier. Going all in? No. I guess just hustle culture in general, right? To hustle means to speed up. It is a word that basically amplifies the pace at which you do something. The problem with that is that when you operate on that framework of hustling, you are implicitly accepting that your pace is too slow, that there is some objective measure of speed that you are failing to reach, which is why you are increasing your pace. That's not intrinsically wrong, but the problem with it is that there are many things that have a set time to finish. Like when you're baking a cake, no matter how much you want it to bake faster, there is a basically cap on the temperature and speed at which the baked good bakes. If you try to speed that up, you will end up burning it. And in case people haven't noticed, that's functionally what burnout is. You are, in essence, turning up the heat too quickly instead of the proper temperature. When you speed it up like that, you end up burning and losing all of the preparations that you had made. The cake becomes now just ash or charcoal. There are many things in life, and life itself is something that takes time, takes a set time. You can always increase the input, but you cannot control the timing of the output. It's like how you can always increase the quantity of cakes that you are baking, but you cannot increase the number of, or you cannot decrease the time it takes to bake all those cakes just by making more batter. So it's important to just remember that you can always improve the output by adding more input, but you cannot increase the speed at which an input or at which the output emerges. Trying to control that is often the downfall, the error that many people make. because it's only in patience for it to bake that you can get a proper cake. If you always rush it, you'll always be burning it, and you'll just end up a lot of time in the kitchen with nothing to show other than failures. I guess what I'm trying to say is that you do want to increase the output. You do want to do that by having more input, but you do not want to increase the intensity. You don't want to bring up the heat beyond what is necessary, because trying to do so will lead to burning up whatever it is that you're trying to perform or trying to accomplish. Dang it. There are things with set timings, and what you need to do instead, if it's a complete unknown, you try multiple inputs at different temperatures. It's like if you're deriving a recipe for the first time. In that case, you can play with the temperature. But you can't expect things to be the same if you do that. It all just boils down to the purpose behind what you are trying to do. Are you testing out new recipes? If so, then what you do is you keep your input the same, but you change your process. Like you change the temperature and intensity. You shift those variables around, but you keep what you do and put into the process the same. Then you wait for the outputs, and then you see if the outputs are affected. You basically run a science experiment. But if you want a particular output, if for example you are testing a recipe that already exists, then what you do is patience. You can change your inputs a little bit, but the temperature, the intensity at which you operate, that should be consistent, sustained. The experimentation is on what you put in, not on the process itself. That's probably another tripping point for people when they are trying to do things, right? You have basically two things that you can really control when you're trying anything. You can change the input, like the raw material that you put in. This would be the ingredients in this analogy. And then you can change the intensity. So like the speed, the force of will being applied, stuff like that. In this analogy, it'd be the temperature. If you do things faster or at a faster tempo, you will get different things than someone who's doing it at a lower tempo. Kind of like how I'm doing these drawings or these quick poses at 30 seconds instead of what artists usually do by taking minutes to do a proper study and then examining each bit. The purpose for me doing this is just to see what happens. I am testing out a new recipe instead of just reproducing a recipe that I already know exists. It's like going back to baking, I guess. I want to make a chocolate chip cookie that uses peanut butter and white chocolate. There are recipes for peanut butter cookies. There are recipes for white chocolate chip cookies. But a peanut butter chocolate chip cookie is something that isn't just a conglomerate of the two. It takes some testing to find out exactly how to balance all of the portions and everything. There will be a lot of failures, obviously. Some will be burned, some will be overdone, and not done yet. It'll be pulled out too soon, for example. But that's what this is for, data gathering, seeing what works and what doesn't work. Along the way, I might even find useful recipes or cooking techniques for other things that I hadn't even considered. That's the benefit of testing out new recipes. You might come up with things that are secondary to your objective, but that have value in itself. I'm looking for those secondary effects rather than the primary effect. Although it'd be good if I got the primary effect of rapidly improving. I'm also looking for the unique things that are only found in this process. It's good to try that out every once in a while, because otherwise you're not adding anything to the overall well of knowledge that exists. Trying to find out if there is a better way instead of simply continuing on with what currently exists. That's how you can expand the net knowledge of life. And I'm all for improving the total sum of knowledge in this world. It is a bit frustrating though, since you're embarking on a path that not many, if at all, have traversed. You can't tell for sure what is valuable and what is not. There may be things that would appear to be valuable but end up not being valuable, and then the things that you had discounted end up being more valuable than you could have imagined. And it takes someone pointing it out for you to acknowledge that fact. But that's also where the fun is, since you don't know what is important, so you just treat everything as if it was. And then eventually you end up obtaining important things that you never even imagined. Because how could you imagine it exists when it's something completely unknown, right? Things like that are the benefits of taking a path not yet trodden. All of this winding back way to my previous point about how people end up echoing things that they hear and see instead of processing deeper and adding to the net value of things. Sure, something can be valuable and something can hold value for you. The words that you heard might be life-changing for you. The problem is, have you considered the implications of how exactly that will be life-changing for you? Because accepting a person's perspective without processing it will shift you closer towards them. If you just take what someone says at face value, you are implicitly stating that face value fact is, well, a fact. It is truth. And your brain will mark it as truth. It will become a sentiment that you just end up believing instead of something that you have actually considered for yourself. That's the danger of it. If you're not intentional with your words and the things that you accept as true in your reality, you will end up living a life that is defined by someone else's definitions. And that will end up taking quite a lot of effort to undo later on when you realize it, if you haven't even considered it. Now, this is a good thing as well, because if you have beliefs that are harming you, just clinging to someone else's definition will slowly reshape your life and allow you to operate in a state of mind and framework that you had not ever considered, which is a useful thing to do. But the problem, again, comes down to definitions and whether or not you are okay with letting someone define life for you. Now, there's nothing wrong if that's yes, but if it's no, then you should be very clear on how you let other people define things. Like, do not allow someone to call you unlucky. Reject it straight out if you do not want to be unlucky. The moment you let it pass, your brain flags it as something that may be true. And then the more data points it has that match up with that truth, or that potential truth, the more it becomes a core truth within you. And core truths will not be simple to undo, since they affect and filter how you view life. It becomes a part of your identity. And unless you are very skilled at manipulating your own personas and your own core traits, it can be very disastrous. mostly because there will be an inner conflict. Core truths that do not originate from you and your life experiences will inevitably end up at conflict with something you actually believe later on. And that's always going to be a struggle to sort out. If you have yourself as an enemy, then you're always going to have enemies in reality, because people can usually sense when someone is not insecure, but at conflict with themselves or at odds with themselves. And the people with agendas, or people who are looking for useful pieces, they will be on the lookout for someone with an insecure internal state. That's why I advocate for training your force of will, for going out of your way to define what you are not, as well as what you are. For example, if you're on social media and then you hear someone say something, or if they're trying to define you, like saying most people in life are XYZ, or if you're watching this, then you are XYZ, deny it out front. Say, that's not me. Exercise your will in rejecting what other people place upon you. If you do this pretty often, you'll be able to strengthen your sense of identity, because you go from passively accepting input to actively curating it. You then become not just aware, but attentive to the manipulations that people are trying upon you. And sad to say, pretty much everyone who is trying to quote unquote grow on social media is going to be trying to manipulate you, either through sales or through getting you to accept a viewpoint perspective that they are pushing. If you're not careful, you can slip into their framing of the issue or whatever, and you'll give them your attention, which is all that they want. Attention is what the algorithms of social media thrive on. And attention is also what a lot of social media creators get paid on. That's how the UGC and marketing stuff works. They get paid based on how much they are spreading the awareness of XYZ product. At least from my understanding of it. I didn't look too deeply into it because I do not like selling things that do not originate from me. How can I be sure that something is truly, truly valuable unless I know it inside out, right? So I don't like selling something. Well, I don't like selling in general. I'm not talking about giving something of value up for money. I'm talking about the act of being a salesman. Because this is my philosophy, or this is my perspective on that. The presence of a choice often induces the choice. If something exists and they didn't know it existed beforehand, there's a high possibility of selecting that new choice simply due to novelty. Or they may feel that it is like an epiphany moment, and consequently they'll stick to it even though they would never have even considered it. I think historically this is how colonialism conquered a few of the original people, right? The introduction of something new that was not ever there beforehand causes the complete collapse of a structure that had been otherwise working, because it could not account for this new input. That's why it's dangerous. All you need to do is to convince one person that the choice you are making available, is valid. And then that snowballs as more and more people believe it's a valid choice and continuously select it. I guess it's somewhat like the Ozempic epidemic, right? The idea of a drug being used to control your fat and your appetite and your dieting. I don't know the exact details of what it does, but just the concept of it as a whole sits as a temptation now. Why do the proper route when there is a perceived shortcut? It's literally the devil in your ear. And the thing is that it would have been unthinkable if it didn't exist. Like, the other choices would have been taken, but because this new choice exists, the tried and true are going to be ignored because of the prayers and the hopes that this new method is simpler and easier. It's just extremely dangerous to be moving through life these days without being aware and exercising your force of will. Too many people want you to not be thinking. It is very beneficial for not just corporations, but anyone trying to quote unquote make money, for you to be in a state where you don't think, where you just accept things at face value. So what you need to do to, I don't want to say survive, but I guess fundamentally it is surviving. What you need to do in order to survive in this world is to train your willpower. I'm not talking about willpower as in the ability to endure, not like using willpower to ignore sweets and candies. I'm talking about willpower as in choosing, as in being intentional. Not willpower to resist, but willpower to actively move, willpower to make decisions and reject decisions being put on you. Because some things are fake dilemmas, like whether or not to listen to someone. If someone shows up in front of you trying to sell you something, you don't have to hear them out. You can shut them up, punt them on their way, and ignore them. Because until they entered your life, you had not even considered buying whatever they're selling. If you had planned on ever doing it, then you would have gone out to seek it. But now they are taking advantage of the fact that you are here and present to whittle down your willpower in order for you to buy what they want and then take your money from you. Can you tell that I dislike salesmen? I understand the usefulness of the ability to sell, and I also understand the principles of how it all works. But that's why it pisses me off. Because if you have something that is good, if you have a product that has value, why would you need to push it so much? The ability and inherent value in the product should be sufficient. If there is a demand for it too, then you would not need to worry about it. It's like the luxury goods that exist. They do not go out of their way to advertise what they have. They do not go out of their way to try and make sales. In fact, they actively prevent sales to certain individuals because they do quality control and then they dictate who can own XYZ. I'm talking about like the high-end luxury cars. That's the baseline that you want to be performing at if you are having anything up for sale. There's a difference between having something up for sale and then having something to sell, because it's actually in the way we use the word sell as well, right? If you're trying to sell something, then you're implicitly acknowledging that what you have is something that needs you to convince someone to buy. You're trying to sell something to someone means that you're trying to convince them it's worth having. If your product was so good, then it wouldn't need to be sold like that. You would just need to inform them that it exists. No, I don't think that's true. You wouldn't need to inform them at all, because if your product was good enough to resolve a situation or a dilemma, or if it had intrinsic value to that extent, people would know about it one way or another. Word of mouth, right? I think that's the term they use. Word of mouth sales would be sufficient. If you don't have that, that implies that your product is lacking in one way or another. Either you are not in the place where people have the problem your product can solve, or the problem your product solves is not yet prevalent enough for people to be going out of their way to find a solution. Now, there's a difference between selling a product and demonstrating a product. And I think that is a fact that people get conflated. You can demonstrate a product without trying to sell it. For example, you can take the flex tape. The I saw this boat in half advertisements. I think advertisements are also different from sales. Advertisements are just showcasing the product. It is exposure. But sales are convincing. It is a manipulation of willpower. That's what bothers me with sales. I can say this too, having once tried being a salesman in the past. I'm sure other people have taken on a Cutco job, selling knives. That's what I did for a summer. But while I learned all of the techniques, it bothered me. And it didn't quite settle with me why it bothered me until I started meeting more salesmen. Because what they do is they are trying to close a transaction. They will resort to any trick in the book to close that sale. Because every sale they make is money in their pocket. It is, like I said, a manipulation of will to make a decision that would never have appeared until they entered that person's life. It's also why, personally, I dislike Alex Hormozy. I respect what he has accomplished. I do not respect the methodology he applied. Because he is pushing a message that I fundamentally disagree with on a base level. Strictly the grind, output sort of message, and that it's the only way to succeed. It's the way that he speaks so absolutely, and the fact that he's hiding, I don't know if it's even intentional or not, but he's applying sales manipulation techniques in his speeches and speaking with such authority to reduce any mental friction that would have occurred normally when people try to process his words. This is actually something that a lot of internet personalities in the motivational space do too. They simply speak with utter conviction and so loudly that it suppresses the internal voice. Or they hit you with a quote-unquote epiphany that's so out there you have to process it on the spot, and then it overloads your cognition, allowing them to mold your currently malleable state of mind. It's very dangerous. Tony Robbins does this a bit too. He speaks and then makes what are very sound assertions, or at least what appears to be sound assertions. But they're also assertions that you have not considered up until that point. And then when you're put on the spot, you have to parse it down. But before you can properly parse it, and because of the time pressure, very few are able to resist the conclusion. He speaks from a position where the conclusion is already drawn and quartered. The execution is all that's left, and that is what happens when you are put on the spot to face his conclusion. Unless you are an adept thinker, you will accept whatever his words are. This is, in fact, what many people do on social media now too, if you are paying attention, because they have modeled their content on what had worked in the past, which are these people who are in the motivational space. Instead of properly helping, they are, I won't say forcing, they're just echoing. It's quite rare to come across a content creator, I won't even say with original content, but with, how do I phrase this? Not deep content, not original, like I said, not even unique. I guess the closest is whole content. Like, it just seems that they're missing a big part when they speak. Like, they didn't process it all the way through. You can kind of tell, right? If someone is talking about a concept and then you just hear the way they talk about it, you can tell if they're treating it like a tool or if they've thought through the implications. Did they think it sounded cool and they just want to echo it? Or did they really think about it in the perspective of their life, see where it applies and where it doesn't apply, and then take what works? It's pretty transparent what they think about it. Like, take for example this saying, it takes 10,000 hours to become world class at anything, right? That's the common saying that has been echoed ever since the emergence of the book The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. At least I think that's what the book is called. Now, this is actually a very deep quote. Like, the words have deeper meanings, but the message that apparently gets espoused is that you must do 10,000 hours before you are ever world class at anything. And people hear that and then get discouraged. But that's actually not true. The deeper meaning and the actually original intent of the saying is that on average, but 10,000 hours was the time that Malcolm Gladwell, or the author, found accumulated for people at the world-class level. But it's not necessarily the end-all be-all. There are many people who can reach world-class far before 10,000 hours. There are always exceptions to the rule, because it's all chance-based too. It's like the law of large numbers, where if you do enough trials of a probabilistic event, you're eventually going to get close to the quote-unquote true odds. Like, roll 1,000 dice, and then each number on that dice will come up roughly around 1/6. Like, 1 out of 6 times you will get a 1 instead of a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, but that doesn't mean that if you run 6 times you'll get that doesn't mean if you roll the dice 6 times you'll get a 1 guaranteed. It's like that for the 10,000 hours rule. It just means that it is likely to take 10,000 hours for someone to be world class. But even that's not set in stone. There are people who will spend countless more hours and never achieve world class. What matters is just the attempts, the hours put in and just putting in input. You cannot tell if something will take a certain amount of time for you unless you go out of your way to test it. Because everyone in this world has a different specification and basically build than other people. I suppose we're at an hour. My voice is getting a bit run out too, so I hope that was a helpful session, a chill vibes, and that you enjoyed me philosophizing for a bit. I'll see you next time.